There are a lot of things keeping us awake at night these days. Top of the list, the health of our loved ones. So it's only fitting that Sambrosa Night Syrups has stepped up to sponsor tonight's Dr. Phil Primetime Special, RFK Jr., the first 100 days. From day one, Sambrosa has been a massive supporter of the Make America Healthy Again movement. You'll learn more about Sambrosa throughout the evening, but before you lose any more sleep over our nation's health crisis, it's time for my exclusive town hall with Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Tonight, I am sitting down with a man who refuses to be silenced. Now, listen, this man has walked through fire, personally, politically, professionally. I am talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Secretary of Health and Human Services. Now, listen, he has long been a voice of dissent and a fearless challenger of norms and a relentless advocate for what he believes is right. From addressing the rise in chronic disease to reevaluating nutritional standards, his journey has been anything but conventional. He's faced criticism and controversy, yet remains steadfast in his mission to make America healthy again. Now, tonight, a candid, no-holds-barred conversation about the first 100 days of this administration. And this isn't just about me talking to Secretary Kennedy, it's about him engaging with all of you here. This is your town hall, and I'm bringing your questions, your concerns into the conversation. But without further ado, everyone please welcome my good friend, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Well, what am I, chopped liver? I mean, you don't act that way when I come out all the time. You got some fans in the house, I think.
Thank you.
Listen, thank you for being here. It's good to see you again. We haven't seen each other for at least weeks. So you've been really busy.
I have been, and thank you for all your support during the campaign and ever since. You've really, I think, done more than any other media figure in helping to tell people about the movement and to encourage people and to drive it.
Well, I am a strong believer in what you're doing. And, people ask me about that, and they ask me what you're really like. And they say, does he believe everything that he says? Is he as committed as he says, or is this all political rhetoric? And I can honestly tell people, having gotten to know you and spent the time that we have together, that not one bit of it is political rhetoric. It would be so much easier on you if you were talking politics, but these are things that you are seriously committed to and have been for a long, long time. You're not a Johnny-come-lately to this wanting people to be healthy again and bringing health back to America. This is something you grew up believing. You were raised to believe that you really needed to be in the homes of average Americans, helping people get things that they didn't have access to, get to places they couldn't ordinarily get. That's the way you were raised. Is that a fair statement?
It was a way, I was an environmental lawyer for 40 years doing advocacy I started the biggest environmental group, clean water group in the world. And it's called Waterkeeper, and it's still, we're in 46 countries. We have 350 waterkeepers, each with a patrol boat on a local waterway that sues polluters. And that was my career. I got dragged kicking and screaming into this arena, which through the vaccine issue. In 2005, I published an article in Rolling Stone on thimerosal, which is a mercury-based preservative that is used in vaccines. It was taken out of some children's vaccines in 2003, but the same year, the CDC recommended the flu vaccine, which is loaded with mercury, for pregnant women in any month of pregnancy, for children at 6 months, and every year thereafter. And they're actually getting more. A kid today could get almost twice as much thimerosal as children in 2003, so there was never any break. And it's a neurotoxin, a very potent neurotoxin. It's associated with all kinds of neurological and autoimmune illnesses in kids. I wrote an article about that, and it really changed the course of my life. It wasn't something that I chose to do. And it was, you asked if this was a sort of a political choice for me. This was literally the worst career choice that I could have made. I lost friends immediately. I lost a lot of family members. I lost a lot of my allies in the environmental movement, relationships that I'd built up, political allies that I'd built up for my whole life. And it's only, but I kept working on the issue, and it was only by hook and crook and divine providence that I ended up here. It certainly was not a plan.
No, I know that it wasn't, but now you've pushed back against authority in the United States, particularly authorities, particularly lately, with regard to health. You now are the health authority in the United States, sitting atop the Health and Human Services with 82,000 employees and a $1.7 trillion budget, which represents nearly a third of the entire federal budget. I mean, do y'all realize this is a third of the entire federal budget and 7% of the GDP?
This agency is twice the size of the Pentagon, which is the next largest.
Yeah, twice the size of the Pentagon. Our defense budget is dwarfed by it, and this is something that is so staggering to me because we have the highest healthcare cost and the poorest healthcare delivery of the other 37 developed nations that it's compared to. You intend to change that.
We spend 2 to 3 times what any other country in the world spends on healthcare, and we have the worst outcomes. We're literally the sickest people in the world. We have the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. During COVID, we had the highest death rate from COVID of any country in the world. So we had 16% of the COVID deaths in the United States, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. And so it's a mystery why people are getting awards and kudos and applause for managing COVID in this country, because we literally did worse than any country in the world. Now, if you ask CDC, why did we do so poorly? They say, well, it's not our fault. It's because Americans are so sick, which, by the way, is their fault. But
your body is a system, and when it's running right, you feel focused, energized, in flow, but sometimes we struggle to find that flow state. Why? Because there's too much static in our system, brain fog, fatigue, and inflammation. The Echo Flask clears the static by infusing your water with molecular hydrogen, a natural science-backed gas that helps your body think sharper, recover faster, and run smoother. This is more than hydration. It's better focus, more energy, faster recovery, less internal stress, and longer-term benefits that keep you sharp. When your water works harder, your whole system does too. Find your flow state with the Echo Flask hydrogen water bottle and get an unlimited supply of hydrogen water at home and on the go. Visit echowater.com/Phil and use code Phil for 10% off. That's echowater.com/Phil. Enter code Phil to save 10%. Let's discuss preparedness, because we know emergencies happen when we least expect them, but instead of just taking it, we can prepare. Let's discuss Jace Case, one of your most important preparation tools. With Jace Case, you'll have emergency prescription medications on hand right when you need them. Think about it. Ever been caught off guard? Whether it's a sudden illness or a travel hiccup, the right medications can make all the difference. Jace Case is designed to take that worry off your plate, so when a minor health issue pops up, it doesn't turn into a major problem. Don't let unforeseen circumstances derail your plans or your peace of mind. Live with confidence. Take charge with Jace today. Visit jace.com and use code PHIL for a discount on your order and get emergency antibiotics on hand for the moment you need them. That's JASE.com, code PHIL, PHIL.
The CDC said the average American who died from COVID had 3.8 chronic diseases. And so they had obesity or diabetes or asthma, and then one other thing, or some other combination of chronic disease. And that's really what killed them. These were people who were so sick that they were basically hanging from a cliff. And COVID came along and stamped on their fingers and dropped them off. But they were already living lives that were burdened by sickness. And what we need to do as a country, we're really, if you look at the data today, the fertility of our kids is down. A teenager today has half the testosterone of a 68-year-old man. They have half the sperm counts of an older man. Our girls are hitting puberty 6 years early. Now, earlier than historic levels. They're hitting puberty between 10 and 13 years old. And these are all, and the infertility is now going up in women and men. We have 74% of our kids cannot qualify for military service, so this is a national security issue. And we're spending, I met with the health minister of Indonesia this week, and he said in his country they spend $3,300 a year per patient, and they have a lifespan, an average lifespan of 84 years old. We spend $12,000 a year per patient, per capita, and we have a lifespan of 79. We used to have the same lifespan as they did in Europe, but the Europeans have now moved 6 years ahead of us, and we've stayed stagnant.
So we're spending 4 times as much, and our life expectancy is going down. Something's wrong. I mean, clearly something's wrong. And the chronic disease among children has gone up. We're spending our insurance dollars, our healthcare cost in hospitals is basically managing chronic disease at this point. It's not for acute care.
About 95% of healthcare costs are for chronic disease. When my uncle was president, 3% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, it's 60% do. When my uncle was president, and I was a 10-year-old boy, we spent 0 on chronic disease in this country. The first pill that people were supposed to take kind of on a regular basis was the pill. But we didn't even have treatments back then. But now, it's 95% of what we're spending on healthcare is going to treat chronic disease. So it's destroying our economy. Healthcare costs rise every year by 2% greater than the economy is growing. So this is existential. We cannot keep this up. I talked to the biggest furniture manufacturer in Wisconsin the other day, and we were talking about the tariffs and whether those were going to help him bring manufacturing home. And he said, I don't care how high they raise the tariffs. I cannot manufacture in this country because of the healthcare costs. The healthcare costs that I spend on a single worker, I can pay the entire salary of a Vietnamese worker. So I can't move it back here. So it's crippling our business, it's crippling our country, and we've got to figure out a way to reverse this trend.
Yeah, and let's talk about this. You talk about the chronic disease in children, and one of the things you've come up with is a list of the root causes. And I've made a graphic of it up here, so I've given you a big prompter you can use up here. The potential root causes of childhood chronic disease epidemic. And these are the things that you're putting on the list of things to work on, right? You're talking about diet, absorption of toxic materials, medical treatments, lifestyle, environmental factors, government policies, food production techniques, electromagnetic radiation, and corporate influence, and cronyism. Talk about some of these things that this is where this is all coming from. This is a hit list of things that need to be addressed. And this is on your to-do list.
Yeah, on February 14th, President Trump signed an executive order that is called the MAHA order to create a commission, a MAHA commission, and these are the metrics that we are now studying. So we have 100 days to put out a report, and then another 60 days after that to put out a list of deliverables about what we're going to do to end it. And you know, I would say the top concern is the diet. We have 10,000 ingredients in our food, and in Europe they only have 400. Most of the stuff we put in our food is banned in Europe. Oh, that is a crazy, that's a crazy ratio. And you know, if you look, for example, food dyes, which we've announced now, we're going to get rid of all the food dyes within 2 years. Let me put it this way: the petroleum-based synthetic dyes. You know, we can use vegetable dyes. That's what they use in Canada. That's what they use in Europe. If you buy Fruit Loops in this country, it is a completely different product than what you would buy across the border in Canada. The Canadian version of Fruit Loops, which is made by the same company, Kellogg's, has only vegetable dyes in it and a limited number of ingredients. In our country, it's all chemical dyes. And the food processors say, if we ask them, well, you know, why are you poisoning American kids and you're not poisoning Canadian kids? And the answer, of course, is Canada won't let them. But why are they using those ingredients in our country? Because they're cheaper and because the colors are more vibrant. And they found that if the colors are more vibrant, kids want more of them. And that's the problem, is that I was involved kind of peripherally in the tobacco litigation back in the late 1980s. And the tobacco companies were, at that time, the wealthiest countries, the most cash-rich companies on earth. And they saw the writing on the wall. They saw that they were going to face litigation and regulatory headwinds. They saw that their customer base was shrinking. And they began to diversify. So they targeted the food companies. And by 1994, the two biggest food companies in the world were R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, or tobacco companies. They took thousands of scientists that were involved in making tobacco more addictive and more attractive, particularly to kids. And they transferred those science to their food division. And those scientists went into the lab and began creating ingredients and identifying ingredients that make food addictive. So putting in loads of sugar, which is addictive, and sodium, and then developing these ingredients that mimic natural flavors. So they'll mimic a strawberry flavor, for example, and you're hungry for strawberries, and you can smell and taste this ingredient, but it has no nutrients in it. When you eat a strawberry, oh, sorry, I ducked. Sorry about that. When you eat a strawberry,
I'm not
you're getting...
taking that out, by the way. It's staying in. The quack and duck is staying in. Despite some post-election optimism, Wall Street is already bracing for a rough rest of 2025. When Warren Buffett starts dumping blue chip stocks and stacking up cash, you've got to ask yourself, what does he see coming? I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. When uncertainty is this high, smart people look for stability. That's why physical gold and silver might just be what your finances need. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil, that's DRPHIL, to 50505 today.
When you eat a strawberry, you're getting nutrients in that strawberry. But when you eat that strawberry flavor, you're not getting any nutrients, and your body recognizes you're not getting nutrients, so it's craving more and more of it. So you have an impulse to eat without ever getting satiated. So you stuff yourself with food trying to get the nutrients, but they never come.
Yeah,
and what you're getting in that food is making you sick.
And it's like an itch you can't scratch. And like this is a picture of European Fruit Loops and our Fruit Loops. Is the camera getting this? And ours are a lot brighter. And what's making them brighter are petrol-based dyes, right?
Right, and another thing they did was these scientists realized that your brain actually measures the number of times you chew to tell your stomach when it's full. It's one of the many metrics that your brain uses to tell when you're full. And so they began adding softeners to our food and make it so you don't have to chew so much. You can inhale a Twinkie. And your brain is telling your body, oh, you haven't eaten anything yet because you only chewed 2 or 3 times. So, these kind of chemicals are designed to make us insatiable, continually eating all day, never full, never satisfied, and getting less and less healthy. And then, of course, there's the chemical, the pesticides and these other kind of artifacts, the residues that are left in our food, and those are not, they're designed to kill plants and animals. And we're an animal, and our microbiome is filled with plants. So, we're literally eating poison.
Yeah. I wrote a book a long time ago called The Ultimate Weight Solution, which was not a diet. It was talking about how we eat and interact with food. And I talked about high response cost foods and low response cost foods. And any food you could eat, like a wood chipper, just where you didn't have to put anything into it, was exactly that. Your brain wasn't getting the message that you were actually eating. So you get a bean and cheese burrito, low response cost food. You never got satiated. You could just kind of inhale it, and it doesn't give your brain the message. And
the same
that's
is
a problem.
True of sugar. If you have granulated sugar, human beings are designed to eat sugar because when the apples bloomed or the oranges bloomed during certain parts of the year, you had a craving and you would eat them for a short period of time. Your body's always craving them because there's a lot of good stuff in that fruit. There's fiber and there's vitamins, etc. But if you're eating granulated sugar, your body is craving it, but your stomach and your mind are telling your body, oh, you haven't really eaten anything because you haven't had to chew the apple, you haven't had to, there's no effort in it. And so we can eat unlimited amounts. Of course, sugar is like crack. It's poison, and it feeds tumors. It destroys your brain. It destroys all of your organs. And we are programmed to eat it every minute of the day, from advertising to it's in everything that we eat.
Yeah, I looked this up. In 1800, the average person had 18 pounds of sugar a year. In 1900, 90 pounds of sugar a year. in 2009, 180 pounds of sugar a year. So, I mean, that's a half a pound a day. So we're eating a lot of sugar these days that we weren't eating back then. And obesity wasn't a big problem back then.
It's not only obesity, but it's diabetes. When I was a kid, the typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his entire career, 40 or 50-year career, juvenile diabetes. Today, 38% of teens are pre-diabetic or diabetic. And we don't have to ask why. We're loading our kids with sugar. 20 years ago, there was virtually no diabetes in China. Today, over 50% of the adult population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And it's because they built 20,000 fast food joints in China. And they are now suffering the consequences.
Yeah. Now, the things that we're talking about, these are not things that are challenging to follow, right? I mean, you get, this makes common sense. So why do you think people are so threatened by what you're doing? It can't be just the confusion about vaccination, because you don't have to go very far to find legacy media that either won't talk to you or labels you as some kind of conspiracy crazy nutball. Why do you think people are so threatened by the message that you are delivering? Because you're saying this isn't you coming up with what you're going to do and what you think should be done. You have a solid commitment to gold standard science, empirical science that's not corporate captured, that is truly empirical, replicable science with good methodology, good sample sizes, and what you're talking about here is irrefutable. These are facts. Why do you think people are so threatened by your message?
Well, I don't think it's a mystery. The industries that profit from these products are very powerful industries. And they're industries that not only control Congress, the pharmaceutical industry has, I think, 2 or 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress and the Senate. And the processed food industry is also very, very powerful. And they're both huge advertisers on the media. Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News, and I had this strange relationship with Roger Ailes because when I was 19 years old, I spent 3 months in a tent with him in Africa doing a film over there, and we became good friends. And although we were politically antithetical, he was a very smart guy, very funny, very, very funny.
I knew Roger well.
And he was also a very, very loyal friend. And for years, he would make Fox News host, the show hosts like Sean Hannity and Neil Cavuto and Bill O'Reilly and all the others put me on to talk about the environment, even though he didn't agree with anything I was saying. And then I went to him in 2014 because we had just done a documentary film on thimerosal and vaccines. And he had a family member who'd been affected. And he said, there's nothing I'd rather do. I believe everything in this film. There's nothing I'd rather do than put this on. But if any of my hosts allowed you on to talk about this issue, I would have to fire them. And if I didn't fire them, I would hear from Rupert, meaning Rupert Murdoch, within 10 minutes. And the reason for that, he said, is 75% of his advertising revenues on the evening news shows were coming from pharmaceutical companies. He told me at that time, I don't know if this is still true, but that typically on an evening news show, there's 22 advertisements, and 17 of those are pharmaceutical ads. The pharmaceutical companies really like evening news because only old people watch the news. On TV, I have a 28-year-old kid, and I said, have you ever seen an evening news show? And he said, no. He's very well informed, but he gets it from other sources. And so they're advertising to people who are the biggest buyers, purchasers of pharmaceutical products, but they're using that leverage to get control, not only to advertise their products, but to get control of content. So, Anderson Cooper gets a salary of something like $20 million a year, but probably 75% of that is coming indirectly through pharmaceutical companies. So that's who his boss is, and that's why he's reporting to, and that's why during COVID you saw, all of these news channels completely on board, shaming people who didn't go along with the government orthodoxies and drumming up fear about COVID, printing the deaths on the chyrons every day and the number of cases, et cetera. And there was and fortifying an orthodoxy that just so happens to create huge profits for their advertisers. And the food companies are the other big advertisers, so the cereal brands, et cetera. So they have tremendous power over the media, and that's one of the reasons I think that I get such blowback.
Has it been worse than you expected since you have taken over? Has the pushback, the character assassination, the twisting of words, the taking out of context, has all that been worse than you thought, or has it been about what you expected?
I mean, I'm pretty used to it because I've been doing it for 20 years. And it was always, I've been censored for 20 years. So, and during COVID, I was surprised because they removed me from Instagram. And they said it was because I was passing misinformation. But they could not, when I challenged Instagram on it, they could not point to one post that I'd ever made that had any misinformation in it. I was always very careful about what I posted because I knew, I was used to being challenged, so I didn't want to put something up there that was wrong. Of every fact that I ever put on Instagram was cited and sourced to either government databases or peer-reviewed publications. And I had a fact-checking operation like I think no other in America. We had 350 MD physicians and PhD scientists on our advisory board, including the Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier, who was the guy who got the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. And those people would not have stayed with me for a second if I was posting irresponsibly. So, in fact, when we got, I sued them on this. I sued the Biden administration, and I won that lawsuit. And what we found through discovery was that 37 hours after President Biden took the oath of office, swearing to uphold the Constitution, he appointed a group in the White House to censor me and other people. But I was the first one censored, and and we now have the emails between him and this group and Mark Zuckerberg and other people at Twitter, et cetera, which Elon, made public, and thank God for him. And I don't think we'd have free speech in this country if it wasn't for Elon Musk, because he opened up Twitter and he allowed people to see what was actually happening. Yeah. And by the way, against the advice of all of his attorneys, he turned all these documents over to a bunch of journalists and said, do what you want with them. Yeah. That's unheard of. So, and he lost billions of dollars. He gained it back, and now he's lost it again. So I was used to it. Instagram immediately canceled me, took me off. I lost 1 million followers. And for a year, they would not even explain it. And ultimately, we were able to talk to them. And and when President Trump came in, they put me back up again.
Yeah, it's about time. All right, we're going to take a quick break. But don't go far, because tonight's town hall meeting will have limited commercial breaks, thanks to our main sponsor, Sambrosia Night Syrup. Sambrosia is committed to America's health through its safe and effective night syrups and its unwavering support of Secretary Kennedy. We'll be right back with more of our conversation, and our audience is going to start getting involved because this is a town hall, not just a show, after the break. Welcome back to our special town hall tonight, RFK Jr., the first 100 days. Robert Kennedy Jr. is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We're talking about the first 100 days. We're going to involve the audience here in just a bit and let all of you here ask questions and give comments. There's been a lot of conversation recently about whether to get vaccinated in general. At the same time, we have a measles outbreak. Tell us what we need to know about the measles outbreak that's going on right now. Is this any more than we've had in previous years? Is it about the same? Where are we?
This is the second biggest outbreak since 2000. So the biggest outbreak, which is about 1,200 cases, was in 2019. We have now, I think of this morning, about 847 cases in our country. We have 3 deaths. We've had, I think, a total of 4 deaths from measles since 2020, or since 2000, sorry. I mean, I would say that we're doing well. If you look at Canada, they have roughly the same number of measles cases, but they have 1/8 of our population. Europe has 10 times the amount of measles cases that we have. They've got about 7,000. Last year, Europe had an outbreak of 127,037 deaths. One of the, the MMR vaccine, the measles vaccine, pretty much for a time ended measles cases. But the vaccine wanes, and also a lot of people don't get vaccinated. And the outbreaks are mainly taking place in unvaccinated communities, but there's also some vaccinated people that get sick. The vaccine wanes about a little over 4% per year. Mm-hmm. That means a lot of older people are walking around with very little protection, if any protection. And there's the most famous infectious disease, the #1 infectious disease expert in the world in 1963 when they put in this vaccine was Sir Graham Nelson. Is that me or you?
It's not me.
I don't see it. Well, just be sure I'm going to kill this thing completely.
I don't bring my phone to the stage.
I'm sorry.
I checked my pockets before I said that.
I saw that.
Yeah.
But Sir Graham Wilson said, at that time, he said, this vaccine is a leaky vaccine, and ultimately it's going to wane. And the problem, I'm going to say, first of all, the measles vaccine works. So if you take that vaccine, you're unlikely to get measles. You're much less likely to get measles than if you don't. And, HHS continues to recommend that vaccine. But there are problems with the vaccine. And, the problem is really with the mumps portion of the vaccine and the combination. And it was never safety tested. That combination was never safety tested. And people just assume that, if the 3 separate vaccines were safe, and when you combine them, they would also be safe. But we now know there's some viral interference. And the combination vaccines seem to be linked to a lot of adverse events that they were not getting from the separate vaccines. So the mumps part of the vaccine has never worked. It was actually Merck, which made the vaccine, was sued recently in a whistleblower case by the lab technician who was ordered to commit fraud. His name John Kraling. And that case was thrown out on a technicality, but we learned a lot about that vaccine that is disturbing. And what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of mumps cases in older people, which would be a paradoxical effect of the vaccine because the childhood mumps is usually a benign disease. But if you get it when you're older, it can cause sterility and a lot of other adverse events. So we're now, for the first time, nobody's ever looked at the safety science on these before.
But do you recommend people take the MMR vaccine?
We are recommending that at this point, but we're also doing studies on it.
Okay, you're checking it out, but for the meantime, you tell people...
What we're saying is, if you want to avoid measles and if you want to avoid spreading measles, the best thing you can do is take that vaccine.
All right, and you are reforming the current vaccine adverse event reporting system. So what you're saying is, your position on vaccines is, look, there hasn't been good tracking of adverse effects. Let's just check it out and see what the adverse effects of these vaccines really are and report those so people can make an informed decision.
Exactly. And the problem is that vaccines are the only medicine or medical product that is exempt from pre-licensing safety testing. So the only vaccine that was ever safety tested in a clinical trial against a placebo was the COVID vaccine. None of the others have any kind of long-term testing or even any testing. The Gardasil had a very, very small placebo group. None of the others were ever tested against placebo, so we have no idea what the risk profile for these products are. And then, you know, what HHS has told people for years and CDC is, well, don't worry, we don't have to safety test them at the outset because we'll have a surveillance system and we'll be able to tell right away if people are getting sick. As it turns out, that was not true. They have two systems. One is called VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. There's a voluntary system, so if you get sick, you or your doctor can report it. But there's a lot of incentives not to report it. And as a result of that, CDC did a study on that system in 2010. The study is called the Lazarus study, which you can look up. And that study found that the system was capturing fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries. That means 99% of vaccine injuries are never reported. More than 99% are never reported. So we have no idea about the safety profiles of these products.
And you want people to know.
Yeah, we want people, everybody should know. Everybody should be able to make an informed choice. And to see whether this is the right product for you or not, you ought to be having have a conversation with your doctor in which he has got good information at his fingertips. Right. And he's able to tell you this is not good for you, or here's the risks and here's the benefits.
All right, right turn. Talk to me about the Autism Research Initiative. You have committed $50 million to a research effort to understand the causes and treatments of autism. Why is that important?
Well, it's important because it's an epidemic. And it's an epidemic that is 1,000 times more costly than COVID. When I was a kid in 1970, there was a study done which was the largest epidemiological study in history at that time. They looked at 900,000 American kids, from virtually every kid in the state of Wisconsin, and they found 60 kids who had autism.
When was this?
1970. And there were many other studies at that time, and people were not stupid back then. They knew what autism looked like, and they were specifically looking for it, and there were lots of follow-ups in this study, and it was a gold standard study. And they found so that the incident rate was about 1 in 10,000, and that is confirmed by many other studies that around that time and earlier. And then in 1984, there was another gold standard study that showed that it was 3.5 children in every 10,000. So now in 2020, it was 1 in 36. And last week, we announced the latest numbers, which are 1 in 31. It's actually much worse than that, if you can believe it. In California, they do it state by state. And California has the best collection system of any other state. And their numbers are 1 in every 20 kids and 1 in every 12.5 boys. So, and this is just one injury. And that injury alone is going to cost us over $1 trillion a year just to treat autism by 2035. And we can't afford it. It is sinking us, and it's destroying the lives of these children. It's destroying these families, and destroying the potential of many of these kids. And that doesn't mean that kids with autism have no potential, but their potential is diminished, and their capacity or interactions and to have a full and rich, the richest potentiality of their lives is definitely laid back. Now, when I said this the other day, I was giving a speech where I was talking about people who have profound autism, which is about 26.4% of people with autism have profound autism. What that means is nonverbal, non-toilet trained, and all these other stereotypical behaviors like toe walking, stimming, hand flapping, etc. And these kids have very little potential. That particular cohort has extraordinarily diminished potential. And when I was talking about that cohort, my speech was clipped and put out there saying that I with Elizabeth Warren giving a speech about me on the Senate floor, saying I had condemned everybody with autism in this country to never throwing a baseball and never writing a poem, etc. But I was talking about this one cohort. The parents of those children, I got tremendous support from, because they said, finally somebody's speaking for us. Finally somebody's recognizing what we're living in. And these are groups that are not active on social media. And they are so consumed by taking care of their child that they're not well organized. They are suffering at a level that is almost incomprehensible to the rest of us. And you asked me about the flack that I get. And, I get a lot of flack from people, and I have for 20 years. But I look at what these families are going through, and, I feel very, very fortunate for my life, because these are kids that had a full potential. Many of them regressed when they were maybe 16 months to 3 years of age. And that has never happened in history before, where somebody, a perfectly healthy child, suddenly becomes intellectually disabled at 2 years old.
And you're saying the mischaracterization was that you were saying autistic children in general will never pay taxes, will never play a baseball.
I was only speaking of those with profound autism, which is nonverbal, non-toilet trained. Yeah,
which is a subset. A specific cohort within that population.
And it's about 26 now. It used to be lower. But that group with severe intellectual disabilities is actually growing within the percentage of people diagnosed with autism.
And you're spending money and making commitments to researchers to try and figure out causes and treatments of this. So why would someone, if we really want to help this population, if we really want to bring them, this population, diagnostic tools, treatment tools, coping strategies for the children and the families, why would someone want to sabotage those efforts?
Yeah, I mean, that's incomprehensible to me, but it's a tribal political issue now, so that's the way our lives work. But it's not just looking for treatment, which we are doing, but it's also finding out what's causing it. This is an epidemic, and it is clearly an epidemic, and it's happening. And epidemics are not caused by genes. Genes can provide a vulnerability, but you need an environmental exposure. And we need to identify what that exposure is. What is doing this to our kids? And it's probably an accumulation.
You're saying clearly there is a powerful genetic predisposition. You're wanting to know what the interaction is between the genetic predisposition and environmental toxins or behavioral interactions. You're wanting to know what the interaction is between all of the factors. Let it be 90, 10, 95, 5, whatever. You want to know what the interaction is.
Well, whatever's causing the epidemic is not genetic. As I said, people who smoke cigarettes, 1 out of every 4 to 5 died of lung cancer or got lung cancer. That means there was four of those 5 who didn't, so they were okay. So you'd say, is it genes that is causing the epidemic of lung cancer? No, it's not. It's an environmental exposure, and that environmental exposure disproportionately impacts people with different genetic makeups. And we know a lot about the genes among autism kids, we know about some of the genetic differences, that there tends to be less glutathione production. There tends to be higher testosterone. There tends to be less of a capacity to excrete metals. And many of them, in one case, 100%, in one study, 100% of the kids had mitochondrial disorders. Mm-hmm. And that indicates that the cause could be an accumulation of materials in our environment that are affecting mitochondrial function, and that the kids who already are in the race with low mitochondrial function, metabolic dysfunction, are the ones who get hurt. And so we need to look at all of those things, and then we need to do specific looks at the different environmental exposures, and those could be foods, they could be electromagnetic radiation. We know, a couple of things we know is that we know that it's a toxin that became widespread around 1989, because Congress asked EPA, what year did the autism epidemic begin? And the EPA scientists came back and said it's a red line, 1989. So something happened in 1989, some toxic exposure that affected every demographic in our country, from Cubans in Key Biscayne to Inuit in Homer, Alaska. And we also know that it impacts boys at a 4-to-1 ratio to girls.
And that's undeniable. You have to
That's undeniable. So you need to find it. You need to find a toxin that became pervasive around 1989, and that has that sexual dimorphism and its impacts.
Right. Before we go to break, a quick note about another one of tonight's sponsors. Maza Chips asked to be part of this town hall because of Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr.'s strong stance against seed oil. Maza Chips are free of seed oils and are the first tortilla chip made with organic corn and grass-fed beef tallow. Now, there's something to think about. Now, I know a lot of you are excited to ask Secretary Kennedy some questions, so when we come back, we're coming to you, and we will be right back. We are back with a Merit TV town hall meeting with Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the first 100 days. And now it's time for you to ask questions about what matters to you and your family. So who's first? Raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. Stand up in the fourth row. Yes, you, the one with your hand up. There you go. Say your first name only and state your question or comment. Go.
I'm Kendall, and my question is, could you explain the process? I saw the movie Vaxxed, where kids would regress into autism after their 2-year MMR shot. Can you explain the process from the ingredients in the MMR to when it goes in your arm to the encephalitis, brain inflammation, and how it actually causes autism? Can you just kind of explain it in a way that everyone can understand?
Well, right now, we're in the process of researching all those questions. And that's something because it's so often reported by parents and physicians that that chain of events where somebody goes in for their 16-month or wellness visit, and they get the MMR and maybe a number of other vaccines at the same time. And many of the parents have reported that their child developed autism immediately after the vaccine. So, okay. And that's something that we're looking at right now. Unfortunately, the problem is that those kind of studies that should have been done on that question a long time ago were never done. Instead, there was a series of epidemiological studies that were created by I would say, captured researchers at CDC, mainly people who work for the pharmaceutical industry. And they produce very bad studies. And none of those studies did the one thing that you would want to do in an epidemiological study, which is study outcomes in an unvaccinated group and health outcomes in a vaccinated group. And no study like that was done by any government agency. And it was deliberate that it wasn't done.
But that's one of the things that you're studying now
and
with gold standard science.
We are now, and we're doing gold standard science, which which means replication, as you pointed out. At this point, there's no program at NIH that requires replication. We've changed that. So we're going to put about 20% of our budget into replicating studies, and that's
Do you know what we mean by replication? That means one independent group does a study and they get a result, then somebody that's totally independent of them has to do exactly the same study with the same parameters and come up with the same result.
And the same data sets.
Yeah, the same data sets, or it doesn't count. All right, where's Cheryl? 257, Cheryl? Cheryl? Uh-huh.
Excuse me.
I'm Cheryl, and I'm a nurse for 30 years. I quit in 2021. Said, how do you propose to rein in Big Pharma and the influence they exert over the health and well-being of Americans?
That's a good question, and we are, I would say, to use your words, laser focused on that. And probably the biggest, there are a number of dynamics that account for the capture of agencies by the industries they're supposed to regulate. This process by which the agency becomes almost like a trade association for the industry, a sock puppet, I would call it. The industry it's supposed to be regulating, and that's how CDC and NIH and FDA have functioned in the past. And one of the ways that happens, one of the really potent contributors to that is the revolving door. I think 7 out of the last 8 FDA commissioners have gone immediately to work for pharmaceutical companies. The longest reigning CDC director, Julie Gerberding, who did several $1 billion worth of favors for Merck, immediately became the vice president of Merck's vaccine division. And this is true throughout not just the top level of the agency, but every level of the agency. And we're going to end that so that people cannot go to work for the industry that they've been regulating.
Okay, are you against direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmas to consumer?
I think that's a huge mistake, and we're looking at ways to end that. I'll say very briefly, one of probably the most potent mechanism that pharma has is that pharma controls the panels. New drugs are approved by outside panels, not by FDA or CDC. There are panels within them that are made up of experts. Well, those experts are supposed to be independent experts, but they're not. They work for the drug companies, almost all of them. And so they have a vested interest, they have a real conflict of interest in rubber stamping new drugs, new vaccines, because they know that they have a vaccine in the pipeline that they're going to expect their cronies to rubber stamp. And so these things are just green lighted, flagged through the process with no demand for safety studies. There's never been a pre-licensing safety study for any vaccine that is a double-blind placebo against a placebo. And that's insane. You're mandating this product. It's a liability-free product. You can't sue them if they kill you or they injure you, no matter how reckless or negligent they are. And there's no safety studies at the outset. There's no surveillance system afterward. And you're mandating that product for 76 million American children. And we don't know anything about it. So the only thing they test for is efficacy. Does it stop measles? Yeah, but does it also do something else, cause you seizures or cause neurological or autoimmune disease? We don't know. Nobody can answer that question. So we're changing those panels so that they're going to be independent scientists. And we're going to make sure that every new product is adequately tested, both for efficacy and for safety.
That's so good. All right, who else? Stand up. Stand up, we'll bring you a mic right quick. Let's go, move, go. Speed.
I'm Nicole. You had addressed a couple of things just a bit ago about years ago the tobacco industry obviously being huge, and at one point, cigarettes and stuff were being advertised like crazy, and then it got banned where you don't see those commercials anymore. Well, how can we ever get these pharmaceutical companies to stop advertising when you just said it's 75% of a lot of times the money? But who wants to hear they're harming, it talks about your leg's going to fall off, your eyeball might fall off, all the side effects you get from it. That's not, we want to hear like good products that we can buy, not pharmaceuticals.
Well, that's what we were just talking about, direct to consumer, because the consumer can't buy the drug, they got to get it from the doctor. But you're telling it to the consumer, so they'll call their doctor and say, I want that drug, right? And that's what you want to stop.
Yeah, and with the tobacco and with alcohol, which alcohol, when I was a kid, you would not see any alcohol ads on television. Now you're starting to, then you start to see them on cable TV because they didn't sign on to the agreement. And it was a voluntary agreement under threat that they were going to mandate it. And my father was actually involved in both the ban on cigarettes and alcohol when he was in the United States Senate. There is a very bad Supreme Court decision on free speech and commercial advertising. Free speech under the Constitution is political speech, and there are many cases that said it doesn't apply to political advertising, that you can do some regulation of political or commercial advertising. At the Supreme Court decision, when the last Trump administration tried to change the drug ads to make them report the price of the drug, the Supreme Court said they can't do that. Now, we think we have other arguments, and one of those arguments, pharmaceutical ads are different than any other ads. Number one, they are advertising a product that the taxpayer is going to have to pay for. If you advertise cigarettes or beer, you're buying it yourself, and you're making that choice. But when you buy a pharmaceutical drug, my agency, in most cases, is going to have to pay for it. So it's the taxpayers are paying for it. So it's a very unusual product in that way. The other thing is that the government, that they're getting a tax write-off from that ad. So the taxpayers are paying for the ad, and then the person who gets that product is billing the government for it. And so it's a very different, we think it's sui generis, that it has arguments that we think, and we're looking at this now with the White House, the ways that we can get by that Supreme Court decision.
Okay, Joe, and then we'll go to Courtney. You two stand up, Courtney, and Joe, you stand up. We'll get a mic over to Courtney for next. All right, Joe, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My name is Joe. Mr. Secretary, thank you for coming. Just want to let you know I regard you as a true American hero. So my question is, Marty McCary, your recently appointed director of the FDA, recently said that he was looking at removing the COVID-19 shot from the CDC vaccine schedule for infants. I believe he said that last week, and I'm interested in your opinion and if any other changes should be made in the CDC schedule.
I think that is that's something that we're talking about, and I think the justification for giving this shot to children is very, very weak. And particularly since there was the safety testing is utterly inadequate. And children are at almost a zero risk for COVID. And we're seeing a lot of adverse events from the vaccine, particularly in children, myocarditis, pericarditis, even strokes. And people are trusting us American people are trusting us to make a good risk-benefit judgment when we recommend these products. And we need to go back and look at that recommendation. We're doing that right now.
Okay, Courtney?
My name is Courtney. First of all, Secretary Kennedy, thank you so much for tackling food dyes. My question is, what do you plan to tackle next? And is there also a plan to tackle PFASs, otherwise known as forever chemicals?
PFASs are a class of forever chemicals, and I'm very interested in them. I brought the first case against PFASs. I was part of the legal team on the case on the case they made a movie about, Mark Ruffalo movie called Dark Waters. And then many of the riverkeepers and waterkeepers, particularly Tennessee riverkeeper, have been deeply involved in litigating on this issue, so I've been deeply involved in it. And it's now ubiquitous. They're in everything. They're in our water, they're in our food, and they're in our cooking utensils. And particularly pans that have a protective coating on them, those are not good things to be using. And unfortunately, the ubiquitous use of them is regulated not by my agency, but by another agency, and by EPA, and I'm working with Lee Zeldin on this issue to figure out ways that we can get these companies to transition. One of the problems with PFASs and PFOAs and that class of chemicals is that when you ban one of them, the company simply changes the formula. They remove one molecule and replace it with another, and then they have a new chemical. And the new chemicals are not banned. So in the past, it's been hard for the regulatory agencies to deal with it, but we're looking at that, and it's a big priority for me.
Okay, I have my hand up. I saw a report of a video recently where you were talking to Bill Maher, who's a friend of mine. And in this video, you said, quote, "Kids are gayer than ever, and they're fat, repulsively fat." Do you remember saying that?
No.
But it was a video.
Well,
We had a video of you saying that.
that's something, those are words that I never used.
Yeah, that was AI generated, correct?
I didn't see it, but it would have been, I would never say something like that.
Of course not. But I wanted to bring that up because this is a dangerous time with AI-generated videos that people can see.
There are hundreds of videos out there that I have seen of having me saying, ridiculous things.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And some of them are real.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. But I mean, really, people need to understand that just because you see it in this day and time does not, it's like, you go, believe me or your lying eyes. Well, they are lying eyes because people are generating very real looking videos, and you would never say anything like that.
No.
That's not in your vocabulary. That's just not you. And I wanted to bring that up just in case people had seen that and wondered, why would he say that? He didn't say that. You didn't say anything like that. It wasn't even part of the conversation. And I wanted to point that out.
Well, thank you.
All right, we needed to take a quick break. When we come back, more with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We're back with Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the first 100 days and our town hall event. And the audience is asking some questions, and I'm peppering in a few of my own as we go along here. We've talked about infectious disease. I'm going to get back to the audience in a second. And people write about that. But it's chronic disease that is really crippling this society. Why are people writing about infectious disease, but they don't talk about chronic disease, which is crippling us financially, it's crippling us in the workplace, it's crippling us in schools? Why are they not talking about that?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I think about that a lot because every new case of measles is a headline. And we've had 4 measles deaths in 20 years in this country. We have 100,000 autism diagnoses in our kids a year. We have 230 million Americans who are diabetic and pre-diabetic, and this was unknown when I was a kid. I mean, every kid who has got a diabetes diagnosis, there should be a headline. Every kid who gets an autism diagnosis, there should be a headline, but you never read about them. And the media is obsessed with infectious disease, and I would say that the probable reason for that is that there's a lot of profit in it. And there's a profit in scaring people and getting them to comply. And one of the things that we're doing that, one of the shocking things to me about what's happening with the measles outbreak now is, and most of it is in Gaines County in Texas, and I've been down there to visit the Mennonites, and there was 2 deaths, tragic deaths. I went to the funeral of one little girl. And one of the things that we've learned is that the medical infrastructure does not know how to treat measles. When I was a kid, there were between 450,000 and 2 million kids a year who got measles. Every kid got measles. There was 4 million kids born a year. And there was only 400 deaths, and they were declining precipitously. They were almost all in children who were malnourished, and this was before the poverty programs happened. So the death rate was going down to almost nothing. And nobody got a headline. I mean, I'm a measles survivor. You know, I got a week at home watching Sea Hunt.
I got measles.
I got chicken soup and vitamin A, which nobody can patent. But now the only treatment that doctors really know about is you got to get the measles vaccine. But there's many things that we ought to be doing for people who actually get sick with measles, and to prevent them, because it's usually not the measles that kills them. It's a bacteriological infection like pneumonia, pneumococcal pneumonia. And one of the little girls had strep. She had bacteria in her blood. That's really what killed her. And she was not being properly treated for that. And what we found, we've got doctors now in these communities that are teaching other doctors how to treat this disease with aerosolized steroids, with budesonide, with clarithromycin, and others. And each outbreak really takes a different set of protocols. And so those are two things that we're doing now at HHS, is really figuring out how do you treat these respiratory infections so that, people who don't want to get vaccinated, like the Mennonites, have a religious mandate against it. And we need to know how to take care of those communities. And they complain that when they go to the hospital, they're treated like pariahs, and they shouldn't be. We should have compassion for everybody. And we ought to be able to treat people who are sick. During COVID, it was the first time in history that somebody would go to the hospital. They would get a positive test for COVID, and they would be told, there's no treatment. Go home until your lips turn blue, and then come back, and we'll put you on a ventilator and give you remdesivir, two things that could themselves kill you. And why didn't we have a lot of protocols? Why weren't we treating people who were sick early on in the sickness so it wouldn't progress? And that, is, I think, a real failure of the health agencies and a failure of the medical system. And we're changing that now.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. I know when they, I said, and I think you know this, at the beginning, when they started the prolonged quarantine, I said this quarantine of our children, the shutting down the schools for a long period of time, this prolonged quarantine will cause more damage and, in fact, more death with our young people than the virus ever would. And I was labeled a nut. I was, seriously, they said he is an absolute nutball. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what I'm saying. But we were at the highest levels.
Let me just say this, there was a Brown University study that showed that toddlers lost 20 IQ points on average.
Yes.
22 IQ points during COVID. I go to schools 2 or 3 times a week to visit, different schools around the country, look at their nutrition and, and cell phone use, et cetera. And every school I go to, the teachers are saying we're dealing with a generation of kids who is so far behind that they need remedial learning because of what we did to them during COVID. During the 1980s, there was a lot of downsizing in this country, and there were books and studies done on the impact. And those studies showed that for every 1% of workers who lost their job, there were tens of thousands of deaths just from not working.
Yeah, of course.
And we did that for 2 years. We put Americans on lockdown.
And we did it with kids when the anxiety, depression, and loneliness were at the highest levels ever recorded. And we pulled their system out from under them, their support system out from under them. And also, we took them away from the mandated reporters who were watching for molestation and abuse, and we locked them up with their abusers with nobody to watch. And their answer was, well, we did the best we could with what we had. No, they did not. They did not do the best they could with what they had. And we abandoned we abandoned those children to their abusers, and we took their support system away, and we have no plan for closing that gap right now, and our educational system is on the brink of collapse as we sit here right now, and there's no plan to close that gap, and we need to do something about it or we're in trouble. Some last few questions before we go. We've got about 7 minutes before we do. Yes, ma'am. Stand up. We'll bring you a mic right quick. Say your first name and go. And if you got a question, stand up. We'll get to as many of you as we can. Just stand up and be waiting, and we'll come to you quickly. Let's move quick. We got about 6.5 minutes. Go.
My name's Annie. I'm a mom of 3 kids. They're 14, 11, and 7. So I've already walked through the vaccine journey with my children. My question for you is, what would your advice be to a mom of a newborn or a mom who's expecting a newborn in regards to vaccines, knowing that most traditional Western doctors do not like to entertain the idea that vaccines are not safe?
Okay, 30-second answer and we'll move.
I would say that we live in a democracy, and part of the responsibility of being a parent is to do your own research. You research the baby stroller, you research the foods that they're getting, and you need to research the medicines that they're taking as well.
Okay, yes.
Secretary Kennedy, my name is Andrew. How do you feel about microplastics and nanoplastics in our foods, and do you have any recommendations for how to address that?
I'm very frightened of it, and there was a recent study that showed as much as 1% of Americans' brains is now microplastic. And that's very scary. We have known nothing about. We know that the phthalates and the BPAs in the plastics have all kinds of, they're endocrine disruptors, and they're probably carcinogenic, and we are doing intensive research on that right now.
And that is scary. Yes, sir, right here.
Hi, my name is Zane. Secretary Kennedy, you're 100 days in. You've got a little over 3.5 years left. There are a number of corrupt politicians and companies that are involved with poisoning our population. How do you stop them from simply waiting you out?
You wait and watch, and you'll see how I do it.
Yes, ma'am.
No, I want to say this.
Go ahead.
That just very quickly, I don't even have my agency heads in. So we're waiting for the Senate to confirm my CDC head, my general counsel, my deputy secretary is a critical position, and many, many other positions. And, we've kind of got our hands tied with these agencies to do the kind of fast action that I would like to see. And we're way behind on the science. And I don't want to do action until I have solid science behind me. And that's, one of the things that's going to slow this down. But we're going to do it quicker than anybody imagined.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and my question is on medical freedoms. How do you plan to proactively support or protect the rights of individuals and families to make medical choice while also protecting the greater public health?
President Trump is a very, very adamant supporter of medical freedom and freedom of choice. And those issues are normally in our country are regulated by the states. So the federal government doesn't mandate anything. The recommendations are turned into mandates in the individual states. The main function that I can serve is to get really good information out about the risks and benefits of these products, so that maybe the states can go back and say, we're going to, allow more medical freedom.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Kennedy, my name is Emily, and my biggest concern is the stratospheric aerosol injections that are continuously peppered on us every day. Bromium, aluminum, strontium, it's sprayed in our skies all day long. And I know you've talked to Dane Wigington about this. He seems to be one of the experts in the field.
Is there a question?
Yes. How do we stop it?
That is not happening in my agency. We don't do that. It's done, we think, by DARPA. And a lot of it now is coming out of the jet fuel.
Yes,
so,
sir.
Those materials are put in jet fuel. I'm going to do everything in my power to stop it. We're bringing on somebody who's going to think only about that. find out who's doing it and holding them accountable.
Yes, sir.
Hey, sir. My name's Jason. My question is, what's the timeline that we're going to give these companies as you find these toxins? And how are we going to hold them accountable to get the toxins out?
Which companies you're talking about?
Any companies in America, as far as food companies, any toxins we find.
Yeah, I mean,
Like Kellogg's, for example.
well, we're gonna go through each of their ingredients. We're gonna do the science on those ingredients, and we're gonna publish that science. And I think to the extent that we can get them to remove the really bad ingredients, we're gonna do that. But for those ingredients that we do not have the power to get them to remove, we're gonna make them label them. So the consumer, so you'll know before you buy a product whether it's going to poison you or not, and what your risks are, and we are going to do that very quickly.
Okay, quickly.
Yes, I'm Jennifer. I'm an educational diagnostician. I evaluate our students PK through 12 for autism and other disabilities. And while they do come in droves, those referrals, we're also seeing a huge intake in ADHD referrals, and was wondering if there's any studies on that going on or what your opinion is of that.
We're studying autoimmune diseases, ADHD, all the neurological diseases, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Rett syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, autism, all of those will be wrapped into the study.
All right, we are live to tape, so we're going to have to stop now so we can get there on time. If you had a number one priority that is top of your list right now, what would it be with 30 seconds left before we go off air?
And I have getting the bad ingredients out of food, making sure the vaccines are safe, making sure baby formula is safe and is available. And I would say those are three of my top priorities.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for joining us tonight for such a candid and in-depth interview. I also want to thank all of you for participating, and thank you, Sambrosa and Night Syrup, for supporting tonight's town hall. We all sleep easier tonight, thanks to Sambrosa and RFK Jr.'s vision to make America healthy again. Thank you. And Secretary Kennedy, you know my platform is yours anytime you want to get the message out.
Thank you, Dr. Phil.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.